Hi there, it's Llarold, and today I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to recklessly speculate about when the next patch and raid are coming out. This is take 2 because I got 20 minutes into my last take of this and looked over and realized my mic wasn't turned on. Pray for me. Okay, so we've already done the first week of this 4-week planned raid testing cycle, and I did that with the inimitable WoW YouTuber Stanky. He's the best. What a voice. Truly a voice for radio. Unlike me, with a face for radio. All right, folks, let's get right into the post about the raid testing schedule. Ronette posted a week ago saying all the usual stuff. The raid testing schedule is very fluid and subject to the realities of a test environment. There's a possibility of having to change the time of a testing session, change a boss that's being tested, or cancel a test entirely due to bugs, server hardware issues, etc. All the usual stuff. Additionally, with all the usual stuff, we found out that the final boss of the raid, Farak, will not be available for testing. We can look at his model in the dungeon journal, though, and we can go, hey, that guy looks pretty cool. All right. So we tested the first 2 bosses on Heroic on Thursday, and then the 4th and 7th boss on Friday. I'll get to them in a bit more detail, but just sort of preliminary report. They're pretty cool, and something different. That's a welcome change after a raid tier that was filled with a lot of bosses that felt the same. These bosses all feel different from each other, and different from Avarice. I'm happy. Okay, so now let's sort of get into the schedule of raid testing. There are 8 bosses that we're testing, since we're not testing the final 9th boss, Farak. And we have 2 difficulties to test them on, Heroic and Mythic. And we're testing 4 bosses a week, 2 on Thursday, 2 on Friday. So that means 4 weeks to wrap it all up. 16 tests, blah, 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 blah. How this is all shaking out, basically, is that testing started on the September 14th here, and it's going to conclude on Friday, October 6th. Now, I had a Google Calendar pulled up, but it is so bright that, like, just looking at it for a few seconds, my eyes are ringing. So I'm going to use the WoW in-game calendar, because I think that's a lot better tool. Basically, testing will conclude, real testing as it's currently scheduled, will conclude on these days, October 12th and 13th. There will be some LFR testing that occurs the week after. No, I'm sorry. The 5th and 6th are the current scheduled dates for the final Mythic test, with some LFR testing starting on the 13th and running through the 15th. Now, this is something that they do. They will do a normal test where you can go in and actually clear the full raid from start to finish, including all the trash, but not including Farak, on normal. And that starts Friday, September 22nd. It starts immediately after they've concluded the Heroic testing for the day. It'll start, so like 6 p.m. Eastern time, 3 p.m. Pacific time, midnight Central European time. So that sounds bad. And then it runs all the way through like Monday morning in the West Coast, Monday at noon on the East Coast, and Monday at 6 p.m. in Europe. So that's this week, if I can get to it. There we go. So the 22nd through the 25th. Get that out of the way. Additionally, we're just going to have, 2 more bosses every Thursday and Friday, and we're going to have some Raid Finder wings peppered in over each of the upcoming Fridays after this current Friday. What they've done here is they've basically scheduled things out pretty abbreviated in terms of like their usual approach to doing this. And I mean, it does seem like they got their stuff together. They got things kind of figured out for this raid testing cycle. The first day of testing was pretty laggy. That Blizzard did have to do a server-wide yellow post informing all the people who were wearing some specific caster trinket to take it off because it was causing server instability, and the lag was atrocious. But it wasn't so bad that we couldn't at least learn a little bit about the boss abilities, and they didn't reschedule the testing, so I would assume that the testing that we did this week is probably counted as done, but they've left themselves a Thursday and a Friday here at the sort of midpoint of October, right here, the October 12th and 13th dates to fill in up to 4 boss retests. And that's a pretty big amount for them. You know, they have done days in the past where they've tested 3 bosses at a time, especially on retest days. So they could fit anywhere from 5 to 6 boss retests. Maybe they redesign a boss. Maybe boss testing went really poorly. We had this in Sepulchre, the first ones, where they just had a boss that they couldn't activate. I can never remember the name of the boss, but I do remember which one it is. And now it's going to kill me if I don't know. So this guy right here, Halandris, he just wouldn't activate. No, that's not it. Lahuvum, he just wouldn't activate. So they had to reschedule the entire testing. I think they changed that testing block like 15 minutes in to be about a different boss. So that kind of thing can happen. And that's really what that sort of safety net of the middle of the month of October is about. So that being said, it seems very, very, very likely that conclusion of all testing will occur this Friday 13th to Monday 16th window of LFR testing. It's very likely that that's the end of testing. It's not impossible that they could test some more on the 19th and 20th, but it seems pretty well like they'll have this all wrapped up by the 16th. This gives us our base starting point. Generally speaking, once raid testing is concluded, once Mythic Plus testing is concluded, which I didn't even mention that, but Mythic Plus testing is also happening on all the weekends after raid testing is concluded. So, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 3 p.m. Pacific, midnight European. They also open up Mythic Plus testing, and that is open for the weekend, generally. Once that's all concluded, you generally have a 4 to 8 week window in which you can expect the next patch to launch, and then the raid will launch 1 week after the patch. So if we're assuming that the 17th would be the first Tuesday after raid testing is concluded, the schedule that we would have here would be 1 week, 2 week, 3 week, 4 week. That would be November 14th would be 4 weeks out. Now we have a couple of things that we kind of can use as baseline assumptions for why they wouldn't release on a given week. For one, Halloween is the 31st of October and BlizzCon is the 3rd and 4th of November. So it's pretty safe to assume they're not going to drop a patch on Halloween where people are maybe not either not in the office or certainly not paying that much attention at work, and then have to keep that patch up and balanced and worked around during BlizzCon. That's not happening. Additionally, they're going to be preparing for BlizzCon. People give speeches and presentations at BlizzCon. They talk about stuff. Some of the development time that could be spent making the game is instead being spent making the BlizzCon presentations. That's just a reality. So probably reasonable to assume that things get pushed back a little bit rather than rushed out ahead of time, on a very abbreviated schedule to get out before BlizzCon. So we can reasonably assume that the patch will be out after BlizzCon. The 14th, I think, would be the absolute bare minimum of when it would come out. However, there is something else to consider there. The 23rd is Thanksgiving. Now, not everybody, most of the world doesn't celebrate Thanksgiving, but America does, and Blizzard is an American company, and their employees are here in America for the most part, so they're not going to be in the office on the 23rd and the 22nd and probably the 21st and maybe even the 20th. They're going to be traveling or doing whatever. So the idea of them releasing the patch on the 14th, the raid comes out on the 21st, and then they're just gone. They're just absent for until the 27th or 28th while the Race to World First is happening. That's very unlikely. So I think it's a lot more likely. Certainly it's just as unlikely as them releasing the patch on the 21st and being here's a patch. We're going away for a week. Have fun. And we'll put the raid out next week. Hope nothing burns down in the meantime. Again, I think that's pretty unreasonable, pretty unrealistic. So I think it's very, very, very likely that this patch is going to come out after Thanksgiving, the 23rd. I think realistically that leaves you the 28th as the most reasonable release time. If raid testing stops on the 16th, the 17th is sort of our 0 day. 1 week, 2 week, 3 week. Not that this is a hard and fast gospel, but 4 weeks would be the 14th. 6 weeks is kind of the median release time. That would be the 28th of November. I think that's the day. I would be willing to, if there was a place to bet on this and I was a gambling man, that is what I would bet on. 28th of November is the release date of the patch. 5th of December is the release date of the raid. This puts things in a pretty good time frame as well, because December 25th is, of course, Decemberween, and that leaves them a good stretch of time with the release of the raid until Decemberween actually occurs, so that it doesn't interfere with the Race to World First. Like, they're doing a simultaneous release again. They haven't changed on that at all. And the expectation is that the Race to World First, the sort of time frame that they've dialed in on the last couple of raid tiers, especially including the massive failure of Sepulchre that they sort of used as like a mechanism for course correcting back to what the race duration needs to be, is under 2 weeks, between 1 and 2 weeks. So if it starts on the 5th, 1 week would be, the 11th. That's a bit short in their mind. The 18th would be 2 weeks, and that's kind of the Goldilocks zone. Somewhere with the race basically finishing somewhere in the range of like the 16th to the 18th if it starts on the 5th. This is perfect. The race wraps up. The whichever of the two teams that has a chance of winning wins on like the 16th, 17th, or 18th. The other team comes in second place, like probably the 18th or the 19th. There's a whole bunch of people yelling at each other on the website formerly known as Twitter. And then you have your stragglers, the people who are, still playing that level of time, 100 plus hours a week, but aren't quite on their level, concluding the race like the 20th through the 23rd, let's say. And then, people basically packing it up for a day or two on the 25th. And, your guilds that raid a little bit less often, kind of finishing in the latter half of the final week of the year, 28th to the 30th. And then everybody having a good old time, 31st, Happy New Year, all that. I think this even creates like a point of pride, hey, I killed Farrakh in 2023. What about you? Good way to boast about your accomplishment of having killed the boss in the year 2023. So I think this is very, very, very reasonable as the release date, the 28th of November, 5th of December for the raid release. Lets everything wrap up in a nice way. And again, not that they really use bragging rights as a metric, but I do think the idea of killing the boss in 2023, finishing the raid tier in 2023, it's kind of a bragging benchmark, kind of fits. I could be wrong. Raid testing could go way longer, or it could just take them way longer to get this out. It's possible. What I don't think will happen is that they'll have this out before BlizzCon. I think there's just no way they could have it out before BlizzCon. And if they try to release it during BlizzCon or the week after BlizzCon, I mean, they could. Just seems unlikely. It just seems like it would be really difficult for them to get it out the week after BlizzCon. But it's possible. Then getting the boss done, the raid tier done during 2023 wouldn't be really much of a bragging rights situation. I guess you could say you got it done, I don't know, before Thanksgiving. That really is a problem, is that the second week of the raid, if it came out on the 7th, the raid would release on the 14th of November. And then the second week of the raid, the pivotal moment would be right during Thanksgiving, which is a pretty big advantage for all the European teams. Okay, with that being all said, let's actually talk about the bosses that we tested. Now, I have footage from the second day of testing, which included the 4th and 7th bosses, but I don't have testing footage from the first two bosses. Don't know why. Sorry, I lost it. The first boss is this big flaming tree, and the first thing I noticed about him was hey, he looks like a Fierylands boss. And he does. That is sort of the clue for the whole raid tier, is that it is kind of a combination. I'm just going to throw some footage in here. It's kind of a combination of the Nighthold and Fierylands in an interesting way. It doesn't quite look like the Nighthold. It looks more like the Afternoonhold, the Evening Hold, and Fierylands. And I'm a big fan of the aesthetic. I think it looks really, really cool. As you'll see from some of the testing footage that I'll throw in right now, the 7th boss, Smolderon, he just kind of looks like Balorok from Fierylands, and he's just straight up in Ragnaros's room. So that's pretty cool. In terms of what they actually do, this is like a full-blown boss guide. Basically, the first boss spawns pods out, dormant pods out in an X formation from him. So if you stack them on a wall, the pods will stack up in a clump. And the way that you spawn adds out of those pods is you drop a fire pool on them. He sort of targets people with a fire pool. You have to go drop it somewhere, and it keeps a lingering flame patch on the ground. So if you were to then drag the boss next to that pool, and he would spawn the pods, and the pods spawn inside the lingering flame pool, they will just instantly spawn. So that's kind of cool. I think there's a lot of interesting approaches, like options for approaches to this boss because of that. The ads just come out and they just do sort of like random AoE. You can also just wait until the intermission. The boss has an intermission phase where he runs to the middle of the room and spawns a bunch of roots and then shoots fire out, and you have to catch the fire, and then that gives you a debuff that you touch the roots with, and it removes the stack of the debuff and burns the roots, and that's how you get out of the intermission. Interesting fight. I like it quite a bit. It's surprisingly complex for a first boss. I wish I had more footage of that instead of these other bosses that I'm showing. It is what it is. And then the second boss is basically just like a single target boss. I'm going to cut back to me recording here. Very generic boss, probably the lamest boss in the raid. Certainly the lamest boss that we've tested. Just basically a single target boss. It has a saber lash on the tank. So like it will do a sort of a cleave with every auto attack. And if the two tanks aren't near each other, it will either double hit the main tank, which is bad, or it will cleave onto a melee DPS, which is worse, because that's a guaranteed one-shot. It also stacks a bleed on the tank, so kind of like my least favorite boss design in the world. But you know, it is what it is. She doesn't really have a lot of complex moves. She basically just has like one intermission move where she jumps to like a pedestal and then will spawn 3 weapons around the room. As a raid, you have to stack into one of the 3 weapons to force her to get a special move for the next minute or so, and then she'll repeat that, and then you can choose a different weapon and so on. And the 3 weapons basically just have like different little mechanics to them. They'll like make you spawn balls that you shoot out at each other, or she'll do like a big stun that's dispellable on the tank, but like it's a big stun soak that lasts for 10 seconds, so you need a quick mass dispel. You know, it is what it is. Now I actually have some footage of these next 2 bosses, and the 4th boss, which was the first boss we tested on Friday, is one of my favorite bosses I've seen in quite a while. It's a 3 mob boss, but you only tank 1 mob. It's basically like a collection of nature guys. You got a bear druid, a whatever this lady's called, a dryad, I guess, and then a fairy dragon. And they all have interacting abilities. Like the bear druid will do, he does a frontal tank cone, so obviously you want to point that away from the raid, and he does it like back to back in pretty quick succession, and then he has a long gap in between. So kind of like a 1-2 tank combo where you do a little taunt swap, and then he does a charge. So his charge does a lot of damage, has to be split soaked among the group, and it interrupts the Dryad's channeled ability. Basically, if you don't interrupt her channeled ability, she'll wipe the raid. So you hit her with the Bear Druid's charge, and it interrupts her. The what is he called? The Fairy Dragon does like a song, like he'll sing a song, and you have 20 seconds to bathe yourself in some of the poison pools that are left on the ground by the Dryad. And if you bathe in the pools long enough, you'll put a debuff on yourself or clear a debuff or whatever, and then you won't get killed by the song. If you fail to do that, then after 20 seconds, you will get like guaranteed killed by the Fairy Dragon's song. So just like a lot of interacting mechanics between the 3 bosses, pretty fun stuff. And also, I think the most important thing here is that the Fairy Dragon has a mechanic called Polymorph Bomb, where he turns people into ducks. And the Bear Druid has a mechanic called Blinding Rage, where he goes insane and he starts doing like ramping raid damage. And the way that you stop that is you dispel the duck people, or you have the ducked people end their duck debuff near the boss, and then he'll get turned into a giant duck. It has the wonderful line in the dungeon journal, while recklessly raging, Urktos is vulnerable to duck magic. Just fantastic. Get ducked, idiot. All right, now let's move on to Smolderon, and this boss is pretty sick. He's a single target tank oriented fight. He has a couple of mechanics. He has like a stack slam that he does on the tank, where groups of people need to stack and soak the tank hit together, because it does a ton of damage. It does seem like it's something that's not going to be immutable, because he does 2 of these in every single phase. It seems sort of like a it's a similar type of tank fight to like Rashok the Elder, where you have like a set number of phases to get the boss down. You have to drag him to the middle. Well, in Rashok, you had to drag him to the middle. In Smolderon, he throws himself to the middle and does like a big channel in the middle, and you do a bunch of damage to him during that point, and then you kind of reset. And he's filling up the room with fiery death as you're doing so. It's kind of reminiscent of Cataclysm Ragnaros, if you remember that fight, if you're old enough. He kind of has a mechanic that works a bit like Ragnaros' Molten Seeds, where you leave lava pools on the ground that have a bit of a delay, so you stack up together to soak the tank thing, then the tank runs out and explodes, and then everybody stacks together to drop some lava pools, and everybody spreads out to shoot out some lava balls, then they stack together to soak the tank thing, then I think they spread out for lava balls, then they stack together for something else and spread. A lot of stacking and spreading and stacking and spreading and stacking and spreading throughout the fight. What's interesting about this fight is that during the intermission, if you've done the tank soak, and only if you've done the tank soak, you'll have a debuff on you that he will suck out, and it'll cause you to spawn a bunch of balls. Now, you're only able to see your balls, and you have to soak up all of your balls because your balls give you a massive damage buff. It's something like 20% per stack, and they don't refresh, so you have an incentive to just gobble your balls as quickly as you can. And I think you have 5 balls on Heroic, maybe it's fewer on Mythic, but that's like 100% damage increase for 20 or 30 seconds or so, and that's pretty good. So you want to grab your balls, do as much damage as you can while the boss is standing in the middle of the room and channeling World in Flames. Again, just like Cataclysm Ragnaros. So this is sort of a new look Ragnaros type of fight. He was pretty cool, and just in general, it reinforces the idea that this is kind of the combination of the Afternoonhold and Fierylands. So there you go. Pretty good raid thus far. I'm pretty sure that we have a good idea of when it's coming out. Pretty confident that it's going to be coming out late in November, the patch, and then the raid coming out in the start of December. But who knows? I'm just guessing. I don't have any insider information. Things could change. But that's my guess. That's where I'm putting my money on. November 28th. Mark it down. Probably. I could be wrong. All right, that's it. Thanks for watching. Bye.